Most videographers are interested in getting the best possible picture they can. The pros will tell you you want at least some source of light in your shot because light is everything. What I'm doing here is a unique comparison and probably just for a narrow set of people, those shooting with no man-made light sources and no sunlight. In other words, moonlight, starlight, or extremely poor ambient light. I'm a hiker and it seems like the most interesting stuff that ever happens to me always seems to be happening at night. When I started filming, it was with a camcorder and I quickly learned, although it was super lightweight, I love that part, their tiny sensors could never pick up even the light from a headlamp or flashlight. So I should go with a full frame camera, right? Well, I needed a lot out of a camera. I needed it to perform in freezing weather, rain, heat, everything. I wanted 4K video at 60 frames per second because I noticed frame stuttering if I panned too quickly in 24 frames per second. On top of that, I also wanted one I could use for wildlife photography since I go to Yellowstone every year. And of course I wanted it for a price that somebody who wasn't retired could afford. I just wanted the perfect camera. You know, don't we all? Full frame bodies have come down in price and are pretty close to Micro Four Thirds bodies now, but those few that can do 60 frames in 4K are still hard to come by 2 years later and are still pretty expensive. Then there was the full frame lenses, incredible glass, but if I wanted anything more than a 300mm prime, I'd have to sell a car, like a brand new car, to afford one. One solution I could have gone with would be the Canon 100-400 f 4.5 to 5.6 with a 2x teleconverter. That'd be pretty dark and the autofocus might not work. So all told, at the end of the day, the Panasonic GH5 was the perfect balance of price and what I would need it to do for me. When I got the Voigtlander f/0.95 lens, I finally had a setup that I could record video as well as my eyes could see in the dark. However, it had to be at 5 frames a second or slower, not great for anything moving around really. So when the GH5s came out, I immediately wanted it. Then I found out having half the megapixels, it would most certainly affect my wildlife photography, but I'll do a video on that later this summer after I've had a chance with the GH5s in Yellowstone. Everything seems to be compromised with cameras. I'd have to give up in-body image stabilization and higher megapixels for better low-light performance, and that's why I'm making this video. If your needs are similar to mine, this comparison might help you decide if you want to switch. First, let me give you a really good idea of what the light levels are like with my unaided eyes after they've adjusted for 5 minutes in the dark. You should see a barely perceptible line right here where the grass meets the bushes behind it. If you can't see it, or if you can see it clearly at all, adjust your screen brightness. You should know two things. One, something called vignetting happens on this lens, which means that the four corners are much darker than the center. So the brightness level I see is best represented by the center third of the screen, so look there. Two, dynamic range is the ability of something to see well in the shadows and at the same time being able to see in the brighter areas. And cameras can't really match the human eye in this area. Think of when you're driving down the street and you see headlights, you can't see the person behind those headlights. Even though there technically should be enough light for you to pick up on that, that's dynamic range. So the sky is actually not that bright. This is how the sky really looks. So now I'll try and edit the sky to match the grass. I think this is a pretty good representation of what I see right now. It's just enough light not to trip over things in the yard. Here's what the GH5s can do pushed to the limits. Keep in mind, I may have had the focus off a bit, but this is wide open at f/0.95. Native ISO setting is at 2500 since it has dual native ISO. And this is not shot with Vlog, although it is pre-installed on every GH5s. I kind of still need to learn how to use it. At 2 frames per second, you can't really use the video. 10 frames per second is not bad. If you're just trying to show what's going on, like if a bear is sneaking up on you. "25 frames per second will give you smooth video. And here's 60 frames per second. I'll just keep going until it gets too dark. 100, 125, 160, 200, 250, 320, and 400 frames per second. Obviously you would adjust something else before going to 400 frames per second, but it just goes to show how strong ISO 2004-800 is. At ISO 1002-400, it has less noise but still pretty bad. Here it's at 10 frames per second. .25 and 60. Stepping down the ISO again, here's 2 frames per second. 10, 25, and 60. Here the grass is slightly better than what I can see with my eyes. Again, keep in mind that this guy is not that bright due to the limitations of dynamic range on the camera. Same test at 25-600. And 10 frames. .25. And for some reason I missed going to 60 frames here and stopped it at 50. I think 60 frames at ISO 51-200 is pretty close to what I'm seeing with my eyes. ISO 12-800, 2 frames. .10. .25. I won't drop it to 60 frames here because it's too dark, but at 25 frames it's close again to what I see with my eyes. This is the last ISO I'll test at 6400. 10 frames is already dark, and I'll show you what 25 looks like. Ignoring the sky, I think this best represents what I can see in the grass better than any other setting. This is what I used for the natural eye levels at the start of the video. For comparison, here's the GH5 on the same lens in the same settings. It's still doing way better than the naked eye, albeit with a lot of noise, and there is actually quite a bit of color. My eyes are only picking up that blue-gray color you get when staring into the dark. Everything is shadows to me. So I was happy with the GH5, but this is at 13, 15, 20, and 25. I'll show you 6400 on the GH5, 2 frames per second, 3, 5, 8, and 10. ISO 3200 starts to finally look cleaner, but of course still has a lot of noise and still struggles to pick up light at 2 frames per second even. Here's 10, and I would say it is slightly darker than what I'd see with my eyes at even 10 frames per second. So did you guys notice a difference? This is a pretty unique test and has more to do with what you can see rather than how crystal clear the picture looks. I think that's what a lot of videographers are looking for, is just this super clean image. I just want to be able to tell a story in really dark conditions. There's plenty of other reviews that will show you how crystal clear the picture can look, or not clear it can look with different ISO levels. So you can always check out those later on. But hopefully I gave you some new information to work with here with this test. If you're a Bigfoot hunter, the GH5s I think would be a great camera for you. What I would recommend is keeping it at 2 frames a second and cranking the ISO up to 2004-800
and then just bringing your aperture down to f11, and that'll give you the really stuttery, grainy footage you're looking for.
I'll be doing a comparison of wildlife photography between the two cameras later this summer after I've had a chance to use the GH5s in Yellowstone, so stay tuned. Until then, this is Derek reminding you, you're working too hard. Thanks for watching.